Hi, I'm Kelly, and today I will be presenting my point of view on the podcast Serial. I was never a fan of podcasts, but by listening to Serial, I explored a different form of storytelling. To me, podcast seems like an intermediate form between watching a movie and reading a book. Movie is a type of media where it does not require a lot of thinking. Since 65% of the general population consists of visual learners, therefore most people comprehend new information much more quickly from watching a movie with many images and videos than from reading a book. Personally, I would prefer a podcast because it is a little bit easier to understand compared to a novel. But since there are no images provided, a visual learner like myself have problems staying focused at times and retaining the information given. This is because subconsciously, I'm putting more effort in creating a mental image in my mind than listening to the details that the speaker has to say. For visual audiences, I consider this as one of the drawbacks to this form of media. On the other hand, one of the most important benefits of podcasting shows is that not only does it carry the story like a novel, but on top of that, it also creates a strong connection with the listener by delivering the message much more clear through the tone of the speaker. Oftentimes, through the tone, listeners can sense the speaker's emotion and perspective on how they view the topic they're talking about. This is unlikely for a novel, because a novel focuses on the reader's response where the information is directly delivered to the reader. But for a podcast, the information is delivered through the perspective of the speaker, and this could potentially alter or affect the listener's point of view. For this specific podcast, I like the unbiased and neutral perspective of the narrator, along with the use of other voices to show the different sides of the story. I think it is a brilliant idea interviewing high school students at the start of the podcast to demonstrate an important idea used later, which is the idea of relationship between challenges of memory and the importance of events. The narrator then uses this as a proof to tell if the suspects in the case is telling the truth. By doing this, the narrator gains credibility, and the listeners are more likely to trust the information she is providing and be able to see her perspective. However, I do not like the topic of the podcast because personally I am not a fan of murder mysteries, and therefore this particular topic does not interest me. Other than the subject matter, I think that the delivery of information and message is very clear and easy to understand. Since a podcast is based on a true story of a murder, therefore I believe that some people can be easily offended by this, especially the victim's family. In my opinion, there are two ways a victim's family can think of the podcast. The first way is a more negative view. Since the Lee family, which is a victim's family, has suffered through the loss of a loved one, reinvestigating the murder again would remind them of the pain they endured. Also, it is human nature to blame others for their own frustration and unhappiness, which seems easier than to feel remorseful by blaming themselves. Psychologists believe that the blame game consists of blaming another person for an event or state of an affair thought to be undesirable, and persisting in it instead of proactively making changes that would improve the situation. For 15 years so far, if the Lee family are the type of people that will place blame on others, then that person will be Adnan, who is assumed to be the murderer of Hae-Min. Therefore, the reinvestigation foreshadows the possibility of Adnan being innocent. Then, subconsciously, the Lee family will again feel anger because they have no one else to blame for their daughter's death. This would seem as no one is being punished for committing such a crime, and the Lee family might feel like they have failed to fulfill their obligation to bring justice for their daughter, Hae-Min. However, in the opposite perspective, if listeners stand by the family's side and show them compassion and empathy for their loss, then I think that this will make the Lee family feel much better. Or if more people like the narrator would spend their time and effort to determine the criminal that actually murdered Hae-min, that would also be extremely beneficial to the Lee family. It would show justice and that Hae-min did not die for nothing. I believe that Serial becoming a popular podcast will somehow influence the victim's family. However, how the Lee family might feel entirely depends on their values and morals, and how they perceive the podcast. I believe that the pilot episode is an appealing start, and I would recommend Serial for the audience who enjoy documentaries and mysteries. Also, I will continue to listen to other types of podcasts in the future. I find it to be an effective way to improve my auditory learning skills. Thank you for listening.